The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is sponsored by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
We welcome to this week's show Republican candidate for United States Senator Kathy Barnette, who is seeking to fill the seat being vacated by our current Senator, Pat Toomey. Kathy has a compelling story. She grew up in a loving family, but was very poor, in a home that they had to draw water from a well, as there was no running water inside. She attributes the love from her family and the work ethic instilled in her, as well as her belief in a country that provided opportunity, that she could rise above her modest means, and did so, and then some. She became the first person in her family to graduate from college, earning a bachelor's degree from Troy University, and then she went on to continue her postgraduate education at Fontbonne University near St. Louis, where she received her master's degree. From there, she entered the military, serving in the United States Army Reserve for 10 years, as well as being accepted into their officer training program. Besides being a veteran, she's also a former adjunct professor of corporate finance. She appears regularly on national TV and radio. In addition, she's authored a book, her first book, entitled Nothing to Lose, Everything to Gain, Being Black and Conservative in America, in which she explains why liberal policies have failed the black community time and time again. But perhaps her most cherished opportunity to date is being a wife and the mother of 2 children, whom she homeschools. We look forward to talking to Kathy today about her candidacy, the impact her race will have in this campaign, as well as her strongly held conservative positions on the economy, crime and punishment, critical race theory, and foreign policy. We look forward to today's show.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial, the area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Kathy, welcome to the Volpe Report.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, our relationship goes back, as we talked off camera, to last summer, and I had the pleasure of your company as we all sat for dinner at the Northeast Leadership Fund's political fundraiser, and it really was in memoriam to a great man and a good friend of mine, Pat Solano, last summer. And you sat down and sat next to me, and we had, as I reminded you, a rather engaging conversation about the International Monetary Fund last summer. And you informed me you were a candidate back then, Republican nominee candidate for United States Senator. So congratulations on your race. You're making history because of who you are, because of being a minority, especially in the Republican primary. I did a little research. I haven't found one yet that is run statewide as a Republican. So you're making history, and you're setting an example for future generations, not only your own children, many children in this state, that you don't fit into pigeonholes or stereotypes. So congratulations on your run and the fact that you are doing it. As you realize, it's a crowded field. You have some very, let's say, heavily financed candidates in that field, as our audience knows. So what, Kathy, about you will distinguish you and your candidacy before we get into a little bit of your life story and your background? Let's start with about your candidacy and what you're doing now.
Yeah, again, thank you so much for having me on. And, let me just go back to what you said earlier. Yes, I am the first Black person to run a statewide race here in Pennsylvania. I would be the first Black person if the people of Pennsylvania should choose to elect me to serve as Black female in the Senate. And yet, like I say to people often, I have never talked so much about the color of my skin until I decided to get into politics. Go figure. I've been Black all my life, and I have never talked so much about the color of my skin. And in all honesty, the color of my skin is the least interesting thing about me. I've lived a very fluid life. I've had the wonderful privilege of traveling and seeing so much of the world around us. And yet, I recognize as soon as I stepped into politics, all of a sudden people wanted to talk about my color. Now, I did not make these rules up, and yet I recognize the rules of engagement as I'm walking throughout. And that is a very powerful tool in the hands of Republicans when we're talking to a Democrat Party. The only thing they're going to run on is race. What are they going to run on in the general election? They can't run on inflation. They can't run on the 59% increase in energy costs. They can't run on the crime that has overtaken so much of our inner cities. They can't run on a whole host of things. We're about to end in very probable we're about to enter into two full-scale invasions with China and over Taiwan, Russia and Ukraine. So what is the Democrat Party going to run on?
Right.
The only thing they can run on is what we saw last year and every year before that is race, right? And so when you have someone like myself, when I walk into a room, I neutralize more than half of Democrats' talking points. What are they gonna talk to me about?
Exactly,
They can't talk to
Kathy.
me about being black. I'm gonna win that one.
Well, that
They
was
can't
my
talk to me
point
about a lot of
in
different
making
things.
that reference. I have, as my audience knows, hit pretty hard on this show. I've taken a kind of a different approach. And I'll give you some for instances. When Joe Biden and the leading Democrats pushed voter ID and suggested that anybody against voter ID were racist, were promoting segregation and a return to Jim Crow, I'm not African American, obviously, or a minority, but I was offended because implicit in that suggestion was the suggestion that people of color or African Americans were not sophisticated enough to complete a basic card that they need to check into a hotel room like they already do, open a checking account, get on an airplane. It was offensive. And I'm very careful, since I am not African American, to speak for black people. Not only am I not empowered to, I wouldn't be competent to. I haven't lived the life of a black person. So what I did in that view, Kathy, for 3.5 minutes on Fox News was get people who could speak about it. People like United States Congressman Burgess Owens, who I believe endorsed you, by the way, and others.
Burgess, yes,
and they
he
were
did.
as offended. And the point in mentioning your race, and I think this is important before we get into the real substantive issues, is that the stereotype in what the Democrats are doing, they suggest that their party and Stacey Abrams speaks for all African Americans. And that's the national stereotype. That's the national narrative on the major news stories. And you are the embodiment. Military service, accomplished, educated, African-American conservative woman running as a Republican. Yeah. So, again, that's part of the congratulations. But yes, you're right. You more than any candidate neutralize that issue. So now let's talk about who you are and how you grew up and let people know, because a lot are seeing you for the first time, your life story. I mean, from a childhood to officer training school in the military. Take us through it.
Yeah, I grew up, as I often tell people, I grew up below the bottom rung of the economic ladder. I grew up in a home with no insulation, no running water, an outhouse in the back, and a well on the side. And I'm not that old. And yet, I grew up on this very small little pig farm in southern Alabama. And, when you're a child and you're loved, you don't know how dire your situation is. So it really wasn't until I began to grow up that I realized that, just how dire our situation was. But, my family, I never saw them complaining. I saw my grandparents waking up very early, going to bed very late. I saw them working very hard and taking care of their family and taking care of our community. I remember riding in the truck with my grandfather. He would slaughter a hog, and then I would sit in the front seat with him, and we would travel from, house to house, sharing a portion of our wealth with our neighbors. So I grew up with my family, loving me, showing me what it looks like to work and take care of not just our family, but the community around us. And growing up in that community, especially when I compare and contrast to the culture in which I'm now raising my own children up in, I don't recall one time anyone looking at me and calling me a victim. I don't remember one time my grandparents looking at me and saying, Kathy, because you're black, because you're a woman, because you're poor, all the odds are against you. No one ever said that to me. And so I grew up believing that if I too worked hard, I could create a life for myself. And as a result, I became the first in my family to go and finish college. I spent 10 years in the U.S. Army Reserves, where I was accepted into officer candidacy school. I spent time in the financial industry working with A.G. Edwards and Sons and Bank of America Capital Asset Management. I've analyzed hundreds of companies. I know exactly what causes those little line items to go up and down. And incentivizing people not to work is not one of the ways you grow a business or an economy. I had the opportunity of working in the comptroller's department of J.C. Penney, an adjunct professor of corporate finance, authored my first book, Nothing to Lose, Everything to Gain, Being Black and Conservative in America, that went #1 on Amazon in the middle of a pandemic. So when everything else got shut down, Amazon was still up and running. Praise God.
Right, no doubt.
And homeschooled my kids, commentator on Fox News, writer, author, so many different journeys in life. And now I'm running for U.S. Senate. And like I tell people all the time, my story, it reflects just how amazing this country is. You hear the arc of my story time and time again here in America. Only in America do I believe that my story takes place. This is the greatest country that has ever existed, primarily because it's founded upon the greatest political document ever written, the U.S. Constitution. But that America that allowed me the opportunity to claw my way from underneath a rock, that America is fast coming to a close under the culture in which we find ourselves right now, being ran by Democrats, but also we have a number of people on our side of the political aisle that are walking around as if their hands are tied behind their backs. We need people who understand just how amazing this country is, how fragile freedom is, and someone who will actually stand up and fight for us. And that is what I'm offering
That's a
the
wonderful
people of
story.
Pennsylvania and the nation.
You've touched on an important point, something I've hit on this show. You know, I hate to draw into just straight black and white lines one way or the other, but I'm going to in this case. To me, you either have a fundamental belief, to your point, that the reason government exists, and if you read the Federalist Papers, I'm sure you have, and you know about our Constitution, our Declaration that you swore to defend in the military, you understand that this country was founded on the principle that all people are created equal. We all have God-given natural rights, including freedom, the pursuit of happiness, and all of that. And government's job is limited. Government's job is to protect you and to ensure you have that freedom. Now we go to the Democratic progressives, okay? Not a big fan of those folks. They believe that it is government that provides freedom, the pursuit of happiness, and their definition of it. And Kathy, I think we saw that. It was all these shutdowns, unconstitutionally disgusting shutdowns, bankrupting businesses right here in Pennsylvania. Governor Tom Wolf killed this state. Millions of lost jobs forever. Millions of businesses forced into bankruptcy unfairly. And that type of mentality of ivory tower elitism that progressives espouse is offensive. And they're losing the battle in this country. Every day I read, mask mandates are coming down. Even Democratic governors are now saying, oh, we didn't mean it. Don't worry about all those mandates. So your thoughts on some of those points, because to me, you're the embodiment of it.
But everything you talked about, I want to talk about it, right? So let me see if I can go, just kind of hit on some of those because they're all very valid. They're all very valid points. Listen, Democrats do not believe that this is the worst country in the world, but for them, it is powerful to sell that narrative. It's not necessarily that they believe it.
Right.
It's just
Good
it's a very powerful tool in the hands of Democrats. These people are extremely racist, especially the more progressive they are, the more racist I find them to be. So I don't believe that they actually believe these things. It's just very convenient for them, and it's a very powerful tool for them. Listen, America is not perfect. But there is no one running a close second to this country, our country, right? I mean, this nation is imperfect because you and I are imperfect, right?
Right.
So if we don't like something about this country, pause and go look in a mirror and then commit to being better each and every day. But this country is the only country you see in history that is constantly moving forward. I am not a slave today because of what people, black and white, did before I came here. That house I described of where I grew up with no insulation, no running water. My great grandmother Rhoda grew up in that home and she was a slave. And so we stand on the shoulders of so many who have come before us who have said, listen, this is wrong. We want to do better. But what Democrats are offering us, they call themselves progressive. They're not. They're not moving us forward. They're actually regressive. They're actually taking us back in time. For example, critical race theory will make us racist again. They're churning out little racists in schools right now. And so we have to be able to articulate that and stand on the side of right with that. I mean, it's so much. I mean, I love my country. I love my country. This is the greatest nation that has ever existed.
That
but
should
she
presuppose
is in
any
trouble.
organized society, Kathy. That's simple, fundamental. That's what should bind us and unite us, is that it is a great... Has it made mistakes? Yes. Horrible ones? Yes. Immoral
We're
ones?
all
Yes.
imperfect.
But, of course, but that does not define... It's also the country of a great country of freedom and opportunity, the greatest country in the world. So, I have no problem with telling whole stories and being honest and forthright, but not just creating a narrative that is not that. It is destructive narrative. It is a narrative that says we were no good as a country. We have, instead of highlighting all the wrongs, you're talking about, that old, who was it? I can't remember. It was a Chinese philosopher that said, instead of cursing the darkness, light a candle. And we need more people like that to do it.
Listen, my life, we are not slaves today for a reason. There was a time, right, when this nation, I have done the hard work of knowing the good, the bad, and the downright despicable things that took place in this nation. But our nation has done a tremendous amount of work to right those wrongs. And now I get to live the life that I'm living. And today, if you don't like me because of the color of my skin, that's more your problem than it is my problem. But it's more your problem because of the work that we've done. Now, Democrats are selling this narrative of victimhood because it's powerful to them and they win elections on that. And unfortunately, we have a number of people in America who have been trained to think with their emotions. But the issues we're contending with today is not between black and white. It is between elites and those who are not elites. It is between those who have and the have-nots. But they colorize it. Democrats, Republican, black and white. It's not. The issue we're contending with is between the elites and those who are not, and the world order that they want to create. So we need to get our head on a swivel. And yes, Democrats are taking their feet off the pedal right now because we're getting ready to go into a general election. But do not forget what these people have done to us over these past 2 years. Remember exactly who these people are, because these past 2 years, that's really who they are. But right now, you're going to see them try to take their feet off the pedal with these mandates and these regulations. But remember, people, keep your head on a swivel, because after November 2022, God forbid they should win, they are going to lock it back down again. We need to remember that.
Wonderfully stated, Kathy. Now let's turn our subject to, there's so many big issues. And believe it or not, with your military service and background, I'm tempted to ask you about Afghanistan and some of that, but I'm going to skip over that because that's kind of receded somewhat. They've already been killed on the issue, the Democrats and Biden. But first and foremost, right now, people are hurting financially. They can't afford when they go to the supermarket to buy food and basic necessities for their children. Then they go to the gas pump and they pay the exorbitant energy, all the energy that's been put down in Pennsylvania that we can't get at. Our governor just put it into the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is going to kill Pennsylvania's economy even more. You have energy issues, and we have record, it hit 7%, the highest since 1982. Our economy is pretty much in the toilet. So please talk about that in your view of what needs to be done. You mentioned the Federal Reserve. That's part of this conversation. Take it up there.
Yeah, I mean, the goal for us should be growth, jobs, jobs, and more jobs. If you go to my website at barnettforsenate.com, you will see my family in the center of a wheel. And around that wheel are various issues. And we're adding issues almost on a weekly basis now because I believe every issue, as your legislator, it should be done. We should look at it through the view of how will these issues impact the American family. If they hurt the American family, then why would I consider it? If it's good for the American family, then let's consider it. And the only issue I cannot tie to growth, as you know, that when the economy grows, when the economy grows, it fixes almost every single issue. The only issue it may not fix is immigration, because of course, as the economy grows, you need new people coming in. But you rarely can you name an issue that we are contending with today that if we are not growing the economy, it will not resolve the issue. But I believe the number one issue that is creating this tremendous wealth inequality is the Federal Reserve, right? So you get Republicans, people come to the Republican Party because they believe we are going to solve the root cause of issues. But when we get in office and we take the House and the Senate and the White House and we do nothing to address the root causes of people's issues, then people pivot and run to Democrats. Democrats will not solve your issue, but they will address the symptoms. They will cut you a check. They will give you a welfare check or a stimulus check, right? But if we can get people in office who actually understand the root issues, you first have to understand the root issues to address it. And one of the root issues in America is the Federal Reserve. It's broken. I think of the economy like a bicycle. And on this bicycle, you have two pedals. One is tax cuts, the other is deregulations. And generally, when Republicans get in office, we start cutting taxes and deregulating, and we're pedaling that bike with all of our might. But if the chain on the bike is broken, which is the Federal Reserve, you're not going to go very far. And what we've experienced last year, and the reason why we have this inflation you just talked about, is as a direct result of the Federal Reserve and how they have created this asset bubble. Think about it this way. If the Federal Reserve focused on stabilizing the dollar, we would have the bottom 90%, their wage would have increased by almost 4%. And over the past 20 years that we have seen wage stagnation, it would have actually doubled their wages had the Federal Reserve focused on not increasing asset bubbles, not driving up inflation, but instead focused on stabilizing the dollar. The bottom 90% would be doing very well right now. Instead, what we saw during the first year of the pandemic, while I was watching people getting their pay cut by 35%, our nation grew the number of millionaires by 30%. How does that happen? When you're shuttering businesses, closing down schools, forcing ridiculous mandates on people, and people are feeling the pressure of that. And yet you see those who have, the elites, are growing in the number of millionaires by 30%. It's as a direct result of the Federal Reserve and the system in which we've created in this nation. And then you start pivoting from that. Look at what's going on with our borders. Look at what's going on with now Biden trying to send our young boys and girls to go and secure the borders of Ukraine, but don't want to secure our own borders. Right. Our nation is in trouble. Right. And we need people who understand these issues.
Yeah, let's turn our attention, Kathy, to right here in Pennsylvania's borders. We have a far left progressive Democratic district attorney down in Philadelphia, Larry Krasner, a disgrace. Right now, I believe they're trying to get articles of impeachment against him from the General Assembly. And he is representative because as a United States Senator, you're going to be dealing with the whole country issues, not just Pennsylvania issues. So kind of looking around the country, what's happened in San Francisco is a disgrace. What happened in Waukesha, Wisconsin is a disgrace. Mostly, in fact, almost exclusively, these cities with terrible crime problems are run by Democratic progressives. So your thoughts on what's going on in this country with the crime issue, including what's happened in Philadelphia, where there were a record number of murders this year?
Listen, Democrats created this issue. Everything we're contending with, whether we're talking about high energy prices, high gas prices, high inflation, high crime, high murder, high rape, all of it is as a direct result of the Biden administration and Democrat policies and the very inferior people they have around them. Nothing we're contending with is as a result of a natural disaster. No, these are not God ordained disasters. This is as a direct result of Democrats and their ridiculous and failed policies. But instead of them having a come to Jesus moment and saying, okay, sorry, we made a mistake, they're not. They don't have that within them. And so right now, they are creating a situation of extreme crime, for example. And they're using that not to say, oh, wow, look, we have the George Soros-backed district attorneys, and they are the reason. No, what Democrats are coming to the forefront and saying, look, we have all of this crime. It's because of guns. So now they're putting a spotlight on guns. But right. Guns is not the problem. So let's just look at Philadelphia. There are 6 prisons in Philadelphia. And generally, before Larry Krasner got in office in 2017, those prisons were either at capacity or above capacity. Capacity is at 8,000, a little bit over 8,000, right? And on a daily basis, those 6 prisons were filled at max capacity or above. Larry Krasner gets in, and today those prisons are at 5,000, right? So you go from 8,000 people, criminals being in jail, to now 5,000. So we have 3,000 people who would generally be in prison right now who are out on the street creating havoc and mayhem. And then people look at us saying, why is there so much crime? Well, the reason there's so much crime is because we got 3,000 criminals who would generally be in prison, but because of Larry Krasner and their liberal policies, they are now out on the street wreaking havoc on law-abiding citizens. So don't come and talk to me about gun laws when we have 3,000 criminals who would generally be in prison right now, but they're not. They're out here raping and murdering and creating mayhem on law-abiding citizens. That is the problem, and we need legislators who understand that and who have a backbone made of something sturdier than ear cartilage, who will go before the American people and help them to understand it and then begin to take our country back.
Yeah. Well stated, Kathy. We're running out of time. I'll make one comment too. This idea that decriminalizing certain types of theft, easy bail, what happened in Waukesha, Wisconsin is a special disgrace. Darrell Brooks had a rap sheet a mile long. In a month, he was facing felony charges on 2 previous crimes. In a month before, he ran over 66 people in that Christmas parade, killing children, old people, and others. He had been in jail and was released. They have a easy bail, quick release program, another Democratic progressive district attorney. Out the door, he had actually tried to run over a woman with the same SUV, believe it or not, a month earlier, and he's out walking the streets. These are the things that have to be changed in our country.
And we know it's wrong. We all know there is something fundamentally wrong with how our nation is being ran right now. We just have to have the courage. We got to do what is necessary. We got to get better people in office. And that is what I'm offering the Commonwealth.
Well, you've made a very eloquent statement, Kathy. Again, it's been a pleasure, even if it's through Zoom, to talk to you in depth. And we look forward to airing your show. You're going to, I think, impress a lot of people throughout northeastern and central Pennsylvania. You made an excellent statement for your candidacy. Thanks for joining us.